Welcome to episode 4 of the Endurance Eats video series. And today's a really special day because this is the first time we have all three been in the same spot all together. But if you are an endurance athlete, runner, cyclist, triathlete, this video is for you. As my dietitian team and I, we are going to be taking nutrition and fueling questions and discussing them in depth. And we have all sorts of animals here. We're at Hannah's house sitting. And so we're at this random house in Minneapolis that has cats, and your dog is here. So you might hear like yips. There might be a cat that walks through and touches the camera. So we're not quite sure what's going to happen here. Yes. So anyways, I'm Alex of Alex Larson Nutrition, and I have my team members, Hannah Cooley and Mary Wirtz. And we work one-on-one with endurance athletes from all over the world, and in addition to being our athletes ourselves. So if you are new to this video series, make sure you tap that subscribe button so that you can make sure you get the most recent episodes released to you. If you have your own endurance questions, feel free to submit those either in the comment section here on YouTube, or find me on social media or email and submit those questions and we can discuss them. So we're going to start with our first question. And this came from an athlete. I'm surpassing 400 grams of carb to support my performance and feeling puffy. Does this subside? Hannah, I'll have you lead this one off.
Yeah. So this can happen initially, especially when we're working with an athlete. Let's say they're doing an aggressive carb load leading up to an event. You might notice that there is a little bit of puffiness, but it could also be where an athlete's starting from. So let's say that they were consistently eating 200 grams of carbs, for instance, and then all of a sudden we go up to 400 grams of carbs. Yes, you are going to see that increase in water rate, just because, as we've discussed before, for every gram of carbohydrate that you eat, you're going to hold on to 3 grams of water.
Yeah, that gets sorted as glycogen.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. So yes, there is going to be that puffiness. And then when we discuss puffiness too, we kind of have to also see, like, are you noticing that it's like puffiness, like specifically in your face or in your fingers or in your feet? Or are you noticing it actually like specifically more in your stomach? Mary and I were actually talking about this just the other day as well, in the sense of, let's say you increase your grams of carbs from that 200 to 400. We also have to look at, what is the source of that carbohydrate? Was it sports products that were also maybe really high in sodium? So you're also getting sodium retention from that. Or was it more vegetables? So you're getting that much more fiber. Or are you eating a food that maybe that doesn't really work well for you, right? Where it's like, not necessarily saying that a lot of people do struggle with gluten, but maybe there's some fermentable carbohydrate, something called fructan, which you don't tolerate well. So we have to look at switching up the types of carb. So there could be various responses to carbohydrate intake, but we have to look at, where did you come from? What is the source of your carbs? And are there other extenuating factors that are playing a role here, like hormones or hydration? Anything that you guys would add on top of that?
Yeah, I think for my athletes, so, if let's say I'm assessing their typical food intake and they are coming from 150 grams of carbs per day, 200 grams of carbs per day, which is low for most of our endurance athletes, it is always going to be best to gradually increase that carbohydrate intake to really reduce the risk of this unwanted bloating, abdominal distension, gassiness. Plain and simple, most athletes aren't going to feel well when they're just doubling their nutrition intake. So if you are starting out and you've identified, based from our last episode when we talked about underfueling and how you know if you're underfueling versus overfueling, and you really want to work hard at fueling better, fueling well, fueling more, we got to do it over time. We got to do it slowly, because you can't just go from A to Z in a week and expect to feel remarkably well. Most of the time, it's going to set you off.
Our body is very adaptable, but I think it's really common for us to see people just like switch to a different diet or switch things all of a sudden, and that really will throw our body for a loop, and there's going to be some sort of response. And it could be puffiness, it could be I don't know what other things do we usually see, like digestive issues. And so you have to kind of think through, okay, I need to make this change, but how can I do it gradually to allow my body some time to adapt? Because we hate change, like as humans, like we don't respond well to big changes, especially with nutrition. And so if we can do things in a more step-by-step way, which is typically how we like to do it in our one-on-one program, we see way better results, and it's going to be something that you could stick with too longer because you're going to have a way better experience.
Absolutely. And I think of a lot of my athletes and carb loading, kind of that fear of carb loading, that fear of bloating, distension before race day, heading into race day. And with all of my athletes that have big events coming up, we always practice our carb loading plan at least 2 to 3 times before your longest ride, before your longest run of your training cycle, to really make sure that we have that honed in and fine-tuned so that you feel good going into it. Are there better sources of carbs that we can do? I had an athlete that we just tried a carb load, and I told her to have some fun foods with it, and I think she chose a little too many fun foods and candies and all of these things, where it's good to have those fun, but again, she's just not used to that high concentration of sugar and inflammatory foods. So we tried it again. So I think that's a huge point, is really to, if you're heading into race day, if you have a specific event that you're training for, we really got to try that carb loading.
Yeah, totally. So, and then also, sorry, I cut you out there. Yeah, like in the sense of, if we do, 8 to 10 grams of carb per kilogram of body weight for that, like 2 days leading into a certain event for a certain duration, sometimes we have to spread that out to a few more days to have a lower carbohydrate intake over several days, just because for whatever reason, that person can't tolerate that amount. So we kind of have to go by what the science says and try that, but sometimes it still doesn't work. So we have to kind of adjust it, but then still end up having you reaching your goal, but just tweak it a little bit so you feel your best.
Yeah, I don't think you need to fear carbs in terms of like it's going to automatically make you puffier or more bloated, because I hear that from a lot of people, like, I ate more carbs and I didn't like how I felt or I looked. And I think there's a balance between that. But then also, looking at carb loading, just go into it expecting you're going to be a little bit more puffy because of that glycogen load. If you're going to a race, and I, even myself, I see guys that are all veined out at the starting line. I mean, your face still does it all. It's just like, you're probably dehydrated. You don't want to go into a race being ripped. Like that should not be your goal if you're looking to really perform it.
That was actually I'm glad you brought that up, because that was like my first thing when I was in Kona in 2019. So many veins. And I was just like looking around. I'm like, I don't have those veins. Like, it was like, what is going on? And then like, I remember my husband was like, you don't want those veins. Not you don't want those. Like, you want to be kind of puffy. Like you need that. Like if you're going into a race, especially a long race, and you are maybe at your lowest weight, outside of other extenuating factors, like that's probably not a good thing. Like you should be a few pounds heavier just as a result of like you actually carb loaded appropriately then.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah. So don't be afraid of carbs. But if there is like a puffiness that you're worried about, there could be a few different things that could be contributing it, not just carbohydrates. But also, when you're up in your carbs, you are going to feel like $1 million performance wise in your training. And that's, to us, in our minds, the most important thing. But I do feel like the puffiness does subside too as you use that glycogen. Yes. That's something too, like as you use up that glycogen, that puffiness, that water is going to get released. It's going to help support your workout. And
it's going to be kind of waxing and waning. Like I think that's where it's like you said, our bodies don't like change. Like that's what's hard, is I think expecting our body to feel and look the same when you're training that heavily on a day-to-day basis. And that's just not true.
Yeah. You're going to have fluctuations and you need to be prepared for that and just
ride the wave. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Next question is a fun one. And actually, I just had a client that I had a call with the other day and we talked about this. So for my really long workouts, I'm getting tired of all the sweet sports products. Are there any savory options that you'd recommend? Yes.
Yes. Love it. There are so many. And for our cyclists, athletes out there, Alex always says the bike is your buffet. Really. Use it as a buffet. There's so many good options. A lot of my trail running athletes too, they're wearing the hydration vest. So you're able to store a lot more solid food options versus having to just rely on the liquid nutrition or the booze. A few of our go-tos, boiled potatoes.
Those are my favorite.
Extra salt.
I like
load up the salt.
Boil them in really salty water because it's kind of, so where I first had boiled salted potatoes was that Tour de Blue around Lake Tahoe. It's the best bike ride I've ever done.
That sounds amazing.
It was so fun. But they had like these checkpoints and they kept having these boxes of potatoes and they looked like they were just raw baby reds. And I was like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And so it wasn't until like one of the very last checkpoints where one of the guys I was riding with was like, I'm going to try this. And he like bit into it and he goes, oh, it's soft boiled. And he's like throws, because they have little like salt and pepper containers like next to the box. And he's like, this is really good. So then I like just started eating them like crazy at the end of this ride. And I was like, this is amazing. I prefer the little Yukon Golds though, but I boil them in really salty water until they were just fork tender. And then I just let them cool to room temp. And there's no wrapper. Right. It's the best. So
what do you put them in? What are you storing them in?
I just put them in like a paper bag and then to once they're cooled, and then I will put them in, like when I used them for Ironman a little bit just to have a little different taste on the bike. I had like a fuel belt that I put them in, but some people have like those little bento boxes on their bike, or like if you're a trail runner, your trail runners, they will eat just about anything out on the trail. You can have your best.
Burritos. I mean, it all goes.
I had a friend once that did French fries that he actually bought from like McDonald's and then like cooled them down. And he was like, that did not work digestively. I'm like, yeah, because they're fried in oil. Like they're very high
Not the same.
I've seen some runners at checkpoints. Like they have their support person that follows them, like cup of noodles would be one.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Where heavy dose of salt there and some carbs and very savory. So I mean it's
I love the idea of rice balls.
Yes.
Typically sushi rice is going to be the most sticky.
Very sticky.
Add some salt, add some teriyaki sauce in there for extra salt or in flavor. Trail mix, pretzels, crackers. I think too, for a lot of my athletes, even altering the type of sweet products that you're using to avoid, we call it flavor fatigue, where if you keep using scratch raspberry flavor, it's not going to be tasting good 70 miles into your ride.
No.
Especially if you've been using it for months on end in your training, you have to try and, because we talk about having a variety of fuel options that you tolerate really well, not only because it's just nice to have a gut that handles a lot of different options, but also just for flavor profile too, and keeps things exciting.
Absolutely. Right. More companies are starting to make unflavored products as well. For some of the starch fans, like UCAN or some of the other companies just make their unflavored starch too.
Tailwind is unflavored.
Tailwind has that naked flavor that I've had a lot of athletes use when they're just like, I'm so tired of it.
Absolutely.
That stuff. There's still a little bit of sweetness, I feel like, to that, but you can add like some different like products to it as well. Like you're really good at mixing and matching like electrolyte and hydration stuff too. So you can kind of play around with different flavors in that way, which is kind of nice. Like you have to get a little creative to keep things interesting.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. And like you said, it's like, it's having a variety of options, just knowing that like, even if it's not necessarily like flavor fatigue, but your stomach might like all of a sudden one day just be like, yeah, I don't want that for whatever reason, whether it's heat or maybe you just wake up and your stomach is off a little bit. So having a lot of options that you've tested, so you have confidence to be like, yep, you know what, that's not going to work, but at least I have this backup.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Are there gels that are more savory? I'm trying to think of.
Spring has some.
Yeah.
I know they have a peanut butter one. I've not personally enjoyed that one. But I like give me anything sweet all the time. Like I literally could eat something sweet all day.
I could do the Morton 225 bars all day long.
Same. That was my diet. I'd be fine.
Or like, is it goo that has like the salted watermelon? They've got a couple salted ones.
do.
They have
Those are
like
tasty.
lemonade, a little bit more sour flavor.
Yeah, kind of bitter. Yeah.
So yeah, I cannot.
A palate cleanser.
It really is. And I cannot encourage enough. Just try, just experiment when you're out there, have fun with it. I have a client that does Pop-Tarts. She's a trail runner, Pop-Tarts. And her go-to is the brown sugar cinnamon, but she was burnt out with that 12 hours into her run. And I'm like, go for the strawberry frosted, girl, like change up the flavor. And even that small fix was.
And that's actually like a good mental hack too. Like, have you guys ever noticed where you're kind of like in your groove and you're doing the same thing and you try something new and you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
It's a huge morale. I'm a really big fan of a peanut butter and jelly halfway through the bike of an Ironman. There's just something about like a morale booster with like having some real food. Cause you mean when you're out there in an Ironman, it's all day long. Usually you're typically having meals. And so like just to eat like a sandwich that's got like some peanut butter, some jam, like salty. And like I said, the bike is a buffet. So usually you can tolerate that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
I've had so many, like myself personally and athletes that are like, yeah, that was such a godsend to have that in my special needs bag to grab and have it halfway through the bike.
I had an athlete that told me this really hilarious story that he was like, for whatever reason, I had this idea that I was going to put a tuna fish sandwich in my special needs bag on the run.
Like a safety risk,
right?
You don't want to be risking lukewarm tuna.
No, on the run. And I'm like, okay, so you got to this sandwich literally at like 2 p.m.
Not a good idea.
Yeah, he was like, I can't look at tuna ever again. I'm like, I don't blame you. Yeah, did he eat it? No, he didn't eat it. He said he got to it. He almost like vomited there.
Well, I had an athlete that did Ironman Barcelona last fall, and she was Barcelona. She went to transition to drop her bike off the day before and was just talking with other athletes and asked a gentleman near her what his nutrition plan was, and he said, "Oh, I've got a handful of like mixed nuts, and I think it was like a tuna sandwich or something like that." And she was like, and I'm like, oh, I should have handed you some business cards to be passing out at transition because it just sounded terrible. And she's like, I'm pretty sure he didn't finish. I was like,
oh my goodness.
Oh, like my heart just breaks for that. So
totally.
Yes. So it's good to always experiment with these in training prior to race
day. Don't skip the tuna. For sure.
Skip the tuna. And then also knowing too that like your whatever, like obviously we had the best of intentions in practicing in a training session, but the race is always going to be a little bit different because you've got nerves involved and your heart rate's going to be a little bit different. Your pacing might feel a little bit different. So whatever you tolerate in training, it's going to replicate for the most part in your racing, but there is some different extenuating circumstances you should take into account that.
Especially the ultra races, because your stomach can just kind of go south just because of the like stress of the mass of the event and being out there for so long. Weather. Yeah. So, I mean, like things like that flat Coke at the end of an Ironman is like, one of those things I'm like, save that in the back of your pocket for that second half of the run. When some of your nutrition's not going to sound good, that's going to be a lot of people's saving grace. I think that was yours too.
Oh yeah, but I didn't wait that long. I should have. But truly, I don't really know of anybody who hasn't done like flat Coke and not loved it. I don't know why. There's magic powers to that, but
I mean the caffeine boost, the sugar, the just like I think fizziness of it. Or not necessarily fizzy, but like it's got a little sharp.
It's got the
flavor. Yeah. So I mean, we just have to have options for sure. But savory, it's good to kind of mix and match, especially if you've got a really long training plan.
Right.
And you've got a big race where you're gonna need a lot of fuel for sure.
Right.
Okay. Last question here is eating 1,200 to 1,500 calories per day is hard. Even trying to eat normally, I'm not hungry to eat. Any tips? Yes. So when I typically see athletes that are struggling with hunger and not eating a lot, I usually will say, well, let's instead of focusing on intuitively eating, like which is a really big trend right now, let's focus on intentional. And usually I start in the morning where I say, let's just start with something small. We're going to have a breakfast, maybe like a little Greek yogurt cup or like a smoothie, something you can drink. I just need you to start out your day with some nutrition to kind of wake up that metabolism and get you eating throughout the day. Because often what happens for people that have gone a really long time with significant underfueling is their body has kind of just adapted to that point and their hunger cues get really dysregulated. Totally. Would be the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
And so with this type of instance, I'd be like, okay, we need to look at frequent small meals throughout the day, trying to get them to eat more, and try and wake that metabolism back up and get those hunger cues firing again. And usually, honestly, with even like, I'd say like 2 weeks, even like less than a month, they start to notice their hunger comes back.
Yeah.
And it's really fun because then I'm like, oh, I know we're like getting somewhere now, because then they just start feeling better. They have better consistent energy levels and their hunger, it doesn't come back with a vengeance, but it just comes back more regulated.
It does. Yeah.
Wouldn't you say you guys have experienced the same thing with people?
Totally. And another thing that I recommend besides like the smaller frequent meals is thinking about like foods that you could pack a little bit more of a caloric punch, but it doesn't feel like you're eating a massive amount of food, like a smoothie. Like you could pack that up with some good healthy fats, and like, you know, you could even throw like veggies and fruits in there. Like it could be a complete meal, but it's something that doesn't add a lot of weight or volume to the stomach. Or energy balls is another one that I recommend, like the oats mixed with peanut butter and honey. Like those can be really calorically dense. And
doing it gradually. We talked about that earlier. Like, okay, so they've only been doing 1,200, 1,500 calories. It's not like tomorrow I'm shooting for, you know, over 2,000. It's going to be very gradual, but even within, like I said, a couple weeks, things start kind of waking up and they're like, oh, I actually woke up hungry today. And I'm like, yes.
Like the other question I would ask that athlete is, are you consistently getting in strength training?
Totally. Yeah.
Because what I often see is if they're skimping on the strength training, their metabolism starts to slow down a little bit and they feel less of those hunger cues.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or even just general movement throughout the day. Like even
they train, but they're really sedentary.
Exactly. Right. Or like even sleep quality, right? Like that can totally throw off your leptin, your fullness hormone, and then ghrelin, your hunger hormone. So if you're not actually getting good quality sleep, especially if you're going to bed really late and then you're kind of sleeping in late, you're not actually getting that surge in growth hormone in the evening, which is going to stimulate your appetite in the morning. So it could even just be related to lifestyle habits that we have to kind of focus on as well.
I've noticed, especially with athletes, where they didn't even really complain about their sleep, but when we get them to just start fueling more and better, that their sleep is significantly improved. They just have a better quality sleep. They're able to sleep longer. And there's just so many like little idiosyncrasies about things that they're like, oh, this is improved. This is improved. And I'm like, yes, this is the beautiful thing about fueling well, is it impacts not just performance, but just overall like quality of life and health too, which I think is honestly more rewarding.
Oh, totally.
As a coach, like a dietitian coach, is like when those types of things improve, I'm yes, this is why we do what we do. Is to help them just live a better quality life.
Because this is beyond training. We're talking the rest of your life. At this point.
Right. Yeah. I've seen that from people too, where they'll say like, yeah, I feel good in my training. Yes, for sure. But I feel better outside of my training. And that's what I love to hear too.
All those intangibles.
Yeah. When they're like, you know what, like I can go play football with my son after I've ridden my bike and I'm like not feeling like I'm just a kind of a dud on the couch. And I'm like, well, that is adding value to your life right there.
Yeah. Like you have one in particular this spring who she came last fall in with just so tired all the time, was training for Boston. And she started having these long runs again where she's like, I cleaned my bathroom afterwards. I played with my daughter. I got some schoolwork done.
Like she is living life outside
She's like,
training.
I don't care what happens at Boston. She goes, this was an amazing experience.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
so like,
and she was chronically underfueled. And for that athlete, you know, that is consistently thinking they're getting in 12 to 1,500 calories a day, I would look at kind of their weekly trends as well, right? Are there large discrepancies in day-to-day when you're working or at school or on the weekend and you're sleeping in and skipping 1 to 2 meals? As our episode last time alluded to, I think the benefits of journaling can really help with that, even for a short period of time, to better identify trends. and help with the discrepancies for that.
And I feel like for anyone that thinks they need to eat 1,200 calories, especially for weight loss, they are off their rocker. Like, I don't think any dietitian would recommend 1,200 calories a day for someone. It's just not enough. I mean, my 6-year-old, I think I calculated he needs at least 1,500.
I know. It was funny that you just said that because I was literally like watching something the other day and it was like, you know who needs 1,200 calories? A toddler.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, that's probably true. You know,
I will say though that for some of my athletes with years of yo-yo dieting and chronic underfueling, that I have had to start them on the very low end.
I know.
And I don't know if there's significant research on the long-term effects on your metabolism and basal metabolic rate from chronic dieting. I would be curious to pull that, but I have had to start them on the lower end because they're not able to really eat 1,500 calories
to see change. Yeah, absolutely.
To see body composition changes.
Yes.
But our goal working over time is how can we repair that? How can we improve that? We can. That's the good news.
Yeah, it just takes time.
Love it. Okay, these were great questions. So I lost my notes here. Where is that? Oh, well. Anyways, we're going to wrap this up. It's basically the conclusion of this video here. Again, make sure that you have subscribed to the YouTube channel, and that if you have any questions from us, whether following up from this discussion or topics you want us to go in depth in the future, either write it in the comments right here on YouTube, or send me a message, email. Would love to hear from you and get that input. So thanks for listening in, and stay tuned for the next video.
Bye guys.